we're going to look at this idea of relationships. Now, we're not going to be diving extremely deep and talking about, well, what does it mean? What 5 steps to find a girl, or well, all this kind of stuff. We're not getting into that. We're just generally, hey guys, we're just generally going to be talking about this idea of relationships. Because the thing that we have to understand, we live in a world where they have completely messed up the idea of a relationship. So we live in a world, you guys watch TV, you listen to music, you pay attention to stuff online. There's things everywhere that is promoting the way relationships are supposed to work today. But the problem is, it's promoting it opposite of what God originally set up. So to truly understand a relationship, be it a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, a marriage relationship, or just a proper relationship between friends, we have to first understand what God says about relationships and what He intended for a relationship. So I want you guys to open to Genesis chapter 2. We're going to go back to the very beginning to find out what God said about relationships. All right, Genesis chapter 2. Okay? Genesis chapter 2. Right here, in one verse, God gives us what He intends for a relationship. He's talking about a relationship between a man and a woman, which is an extremely important relationship that God gave us. We have to understand the proper way. We have to understand what God intended. Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his... Okay, verse 24. All I'm reading, not reading verse 25. Sorry about that. You can read that one on your own. All right, let me start. It's just not. Let me start over. All right. That was unintentional, but let's read verse 24 again, okay? Let's read verse 24 again. Pay attention to the wording. Okay, I know this is kind of funny. Pay attention to the wording, because the wording is very important in this verse. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Here's what I want you guys to understand. In this one verse, God gave us 3 important steps. And these steps happen in a specific order. And when you start to mix up that order in any way, it starts to mess up relationships. You start to have all these issues in relationships. There is 3 steps that happen one after another, and that's the only way it's supposed to be. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother. That first step right there is talking about the idea of maturity. It's talking about growing up and being able to go away from your parents and live on your own. Now, this is specifically talking to guys too. So what this is telling us as guys is the first step in a boy-girl relationship is we are to be mature. We are to take it seriously. We are to be able to handle responsibility on our own. That's the idea. That's what it is telling us here. Now, there are a lot of people in today's world that skip that step. They just jump into a relationship when they're not ready, they're not mature, and it messes up relationships. It hurts relationships. The person that they get involved with gets hurt because they're not mature enough to handle responsibility. We have this mentality, we think we have to be in a relationship as soon as we're 12 years old. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be mature first. First step in a relationship. A man shall leave his father and mother. You are to grow up, to be mature, to be able to handle responsibility before you consider getting into a relationship. Second step. And hold fast to his wife. Wife is a legal term. I want you to understand this. Wife is a legal term that comes from a marriage. Okay, before my wife and I were married, even when we knew we were going to get married, I could not call her my wife. It took the legal action of getting married, going through the proper steps, signing the paperwork before she's legally my wife. Before that, she was a girl that I was dating and I was engaged to, but I could not call her my wife. Wife is a legal term. Second step is marriage. So you got that first step of growing up and becoming mature. so you can handle relationships, so you can handle responsibility, Second step is getting married. That legal term of marriage. And they shall become one flesh. The last part of this verse here. And they shall become one flesh. Okay? Now we're all going to be mature here because I'm just going to say that's referring to sex. That is the of course the adult leader is the one that laughs. That is the intimate part of the relationship. The two becoming one flesh refers to that intimate part of the relationship. But do you notice that it doesn't happen before marriage? It doesn't even happen before maturity. First, you grow up, you become mature, you can handle responsibility so that you can take care of somebody else. Then you get married, and once you are husband and wife, then comes the intimate time, where you become one flesh. And that's how God intended it. Here's the problem. We see TV shows all the time. We hear songs in the radio all the time. Our friends all around us at school constantly promote the idea of date, be intimate, and someday you can get married. That's the improper order. That's not right. But that's a culture that we live in. You can go home and watch a TV show, any sitcom. And sad to say, pretty much any sitcom, you are going to see a relationship where people aren't married, but they're sleeping together. That is an improper way to look at relationships. That is what is being promoted. That is what is being thrown at you every day. And then we're expected to go into a relationship and everything to work out and everything to be okay when we enter that relationship the wrong way. That's why so many relationships have issues. It is amazing how many relationships today, there is so much baggage from the past because people did not take it seriously in the past. And they bring in all that baggage with them. Relationships are hard. But when we mix it up, we bring in extra stuff and extra problems into an already not easy situation. It is always better to follow what God laid out as a plan. Always, always better. Don't ever think, it doesn't matter. It always matters. It is always better. Go over to Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to look at another passage that talks more about just relationships overall. It refers to the marriage relationship too, but it starts off just generally talking about relationships. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. It's a very good chapter. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Starting in verse 21. Submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. Okay, this is talking about how we are to treat each other in relationships. Submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And then continuing. Gets into the marriage. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water and with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. For he who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, Paul's now going to refer us back to the verse we just read from Genesis. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Paul reminds us again the order that it's supposed to happen in. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let his wife see that she respects her husband. What I want us to understand is, and you guys are going to go through this a little bit more in your small groups, I'm not going to talk about all of it now. Through this entire section of Ephesians chapter 5, Paul talks about relationships between each other and our relationship with God as though they go together. He keeps intertwining them. The way we're supposed to treat our wives, men, is the same way that Christ treats the church. Wives, the same way that you treat your husband is the way you treat Christ. There is this idea that our relationships are an indicator of our relationship to God. Our relationships here on earth are an indicator of our relationship with God. Another reason we need to take relationships very seriously. And we need to make sure we follow God in what God lays out for relationships. Because if we don't take relationships seriously here in this life, we're ignoring what God says, we don't respect God, we're not taking our relationship with God very seriously either. Because if we know what God says about relationships and we choose not to follow it, we are choosing to not obey Christ. And so the way that we treat each other, be it our husband and wife, the people we marry, or someday will marry, or, going back to verse 21, it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That's talking about everybody. That's talking about the idea of treating everybody with respect. It goes along with Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 4, where it says, consider others as better than yourself. Look to their own needs, not your own. The idea is I'm making other people more important than me. My radar is up to see what they need. I'm not just one of those people, hey, you do what I want, or we're not hanging out. We're to treat everybody with respect. We're to treat everybody as though they're better than us. Not in the sense that we think we're bad, but so we're looking to take care of other people. That is a relationship. And that's how all our relationships should be. And that should simply transfer over to that one relationship that we choose to become married. But all our relationships, both the married relationship and every other relationship we have, is just an indicator of our relationship with Christ. So the way we do or don't respect each other is an indicator of the way we do or do not respect God. So we need to take it very seriously. We cannot let the culture tell us anymore what relationships are supposed to be like, because they're messing it up. We got to get back to what it's supposed to be like. We have to get back to what it's supposed to be like. Here's what I want you guys to do. You guys are going to go into your small groups, and you're going to look at these passages that we talked about. You're going to dive a little bit deeper. You're going to answer some questions about this idea of relationships. Okay? Girls, stay in here. Guys, go ahead and go in this room over here, and I'll call you back when we're done. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, because we didn't meet last week, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the idea of modesty. Okay? We talked about how it's changed and how it's been redefined in all the areas in our life where we have to strive to be modest, strive for purity. Tonight we're talking about relationships. And what we need to understand is what we talked about 2 weeks ago and when we talk about tonight, they go hand in hand. You guys talked about, did you guys talk about 1 Timothy 5, 1 and 2? You treat men and women, young and old, with all purity. That's both in the way that we act towards them and the way they act towards us, and the way we act towards others. All purity. We need to enter relationships very carefully. We need to understand that God had a specific purpose when it comes to relationships. And He knows us best. And so the best thing that we can do for ourselves and for the people that we are in relationship with is to enter every relationship the way God intended. To treat others the way God wants us to treat them. To follow His plan, because His plan is better than any plan that this world will throw at you and say, hey, try it this way. You guys are young. But even now, you need to have the right mindset as you even begin to think about the idea of entering into a relationship someday. And remember too, the way that we treat others, the relationships that we have, is an indicator of our relationship with God. So if we are not willing to respect other people, to treat other people the way that we should, it shows that our relationship with God is not what it should be like. So it's another reason we need to take relationships seriously. Okay?